been going through the book of Ephesians. If you remember, we have looked at the first 3 chapters talking about our position, and then the last 3 chapters are talking about our practice. If you remember, we were looking at that we shouldn't walk as foolish men in darkness and in doing their works, but we should be wise men, making the most of the time. And then we also, remember we talked about last week, as a wise man, he will then be controlled by the Holy Spirit, and he will speaking to each other in the service with love and different things, singing one another, giving thanks, and also then being subject to one another. So, since you talked about subject, then he's now going to go on to the next part. He's now going to talk about the home. What's the will of God in the home? Would you agree with me that quite a battleground going on in the home in American homes today? I think the rights and roles of those in the home are greatly under attack. We hear people, kids taking adults to their parents to court and doing all kinds of stuff. So it's greatly under attack, and he's going to address it. And so, I think the Word of God is often misunderstood, misrepresented, and often it's thought to be relative truth. In other words, it was truth 2,000 years ago, but it doesn't speak to the home today. If we believe the Word of God is without error, then it speaks to today's home just as much as it spoke to that home. When you think about it, in the time in which this was written, half of the people around were slaves or living in different positions. So I think it's interesting when we look at it. So what's the will of God in the home? We'll only cover part of it today. And I think what happens is people know the passage well. And what happens so often, I think the husbands will turn to the wife and say, what? Ephesians 5:22 says, you need to be subject to him. And then the wife will turn to the husband and say, you need to love me, like Christ loved the church. You notice it's interesting passages he's writing to wives about the wife's role. He's not writing to husbands to tell them what they need to tell their wife. And it's the same thing when he writes to the husband. He's not saying this is what the wife should quote. So I think it's interesting. I've often heard different ones tell me, well, when he loves me like that, I'll be subject to him. Or when she does this for me, then I will love her. It's interesting. These are commands. These are not options so far as if these things happen. So what I want to look at a little more is just give you some practical things to think about afterward. Let's just look and see, first of all, what it does. I think the reminder we need to think of. Remember in Genesis chapter 2, in verse 8 and 11, you remember after Adam has named everything and all the different ones, it said it is not, it's not suitable for a man to be what? Alone. I'll make a helper suitable for him. Verse 8 and verse 11. Now it's interesting. What was man's greatest need? Loneliness. Notice it has nothing to do with procreation or anything else. Man's loneliness. And I think what happens, that's still true today for a man and a woman both. Loneliness is quite often what brings for marriage. But can you be lonelier in marriage than what you were before you were married? So I think it's interesting when we look at it. The issue is loneliness. Why is it so often when people have been married, Don Eaton and others, when the Lord took the spouse home, what was their hardest thing they were dealing with? Loneliness. So be thinking about it when we look at it. One of the purposes for marriage is that of dealing with loneliness. So let's look at it. First of all, he has the role of wife. Addresses them. It says, wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. Notice the role of submission. What is it? It's 2 words put together, means to place under. To place yourself under. Does it mean you're inferior? No. Notice it also, it says what it doesn't mean also, it doesn't mean you're a slave. It's also, notice it has nothing to do with outside the home. But in the home, you can't have 2 chiefs, correct? But anybody who's doing anything, if you're a leader, you have people who you then give responsibilities to. If your wife's better with the finances, then if you're an intelligent leader, who should be doing the finance? All these different things. But notice that's what it says. You can't have 2. And what happens today, we're trying to say we're going to be co-heirs. We're going to be co-doing this. Well, then what does it tell the kid? How do we know? And usually you're going to work together as a team. It's just every so often they'll come down to times when one wants this and one says we're doing that, and you have to make the decision. I think it's interesting what it also says that to your own husbands, not to men. There's a big difference. A big difference. So it has nothing whatsoever to think what happens. What is, generalizations, there's always exceptions, but one of the greatest needs for men and for women, one greatest need for a man is that of when you think about what he's looking for and what a woman's looking for. Does a woman like security? How well does a woman like it when her husband's changing jobs all the time, can't keep a job, moving all the time? They don't like it. They want security. But the same thing happens, what's the needs of men? Do they want a place of significance? And when they don't think that they're important, why is it so hard for men to retire? Because when they leave, what am I needing? When the kids are gone and the grandkids are gone, what purpose do I have? A need of significance. So I think it's interesting when you look at it. But notice the role of submission. And so I think when you look at it, notice the last part of the word, verse 22, as to the Lord. So when I'm submitting to my husband, I need to realize I'm submitting to the Lord. So what happens then, I think when we keep that in mind, it's not an option, it's what I need to be doing. And when I don't do it, then I'm also not submitting to the Lord. So I think it's important. Notice the next part. Why should we do this? In verse 23 and 24, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body, but as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything. So notice, I think it's interesting, I was trying to think of how to put it, but I put down the principle of being a shepherd. I think it's important for a husband, notice what he's supposed to be doing if he's going to be like Christ. As a shepherd, who is supposed to protect? Who's supposed to provide? Who's supposed to be doing this? He's supposed to be doing these things, and the wife will be more than happy and willing to separate underneath. So I think it's interesting what happens is the husband needs to be doing his job and the wife. But I think what happens so often, we start switching roles. But it's also, I think it's interesting here is that when we talk about the shepherd, it's going to get down here in a minute, when it talks about spiritual leadership. Who's supposed to be the spiritual leader in the home? The husband is. Who is the spiritual leader in most American Christian homes today? The wife. Notice it says in 1 Corinthians, when a wife has a question, she's supposed to ask who? Her husband. And usually when a question is asked by the kids, what does the husband say? Go ask mom. So what happens is, I think it's interesting, then we need to be put in the place where it needs to be. So if we don't know the answers, guys, what do we need to do? How is it you learn how to do all the things on a car and all these other things? You learned them. You saw a need. So we need to likewise, if we see things, we need to take the responsibility and do it. And I think it's important for us to do it. Notice the reason she's submitting is because of the fact that's the position God's placed. Now whether men want to do it or not, still that's what they're supposed to be doing. So that of a shepherd, and then notice then that of a spiritual leader. But then also I think because of the principle of Scripture. Why should I do it? Because Scripture told me to do it. A lot of times, but we're all that way when I'm at work, when I go to the refinery. Do I have to place myself underneath the people there? I have to wear all these different things. You look like I'm a Martian sometimes when I get out there. You have all this equipment you have on, this floor gas monitor you have on, you have all these things you have to wear. If I want to work there, what do I have to do? I have to sign into the units. If I drive I have wells all over, I got 600 wells in different places, have the equipment. So if I drive from here to Tommy, but I need over there because I need my tools or working on something, I'm supposed to put my seatbelt on. Speed limit is 15 miles an hour, the fastest you can possibly go. And they have radar and they check you and all this stuff. And you get turned in if you don't have the seatbelt. So here you're supposed to set the emergency brake. So here you go over there and you're supposed to put this on, drive 15 feet, put it on. It's just after a while. But notice again, Who is the boss? Who says what you're supposed to be doing? So if I want to work there, then I need to abide by it, or I need to be willing to what? Pay the price. So think about it when we're looking at it, the principle of Scripture. Notice that I think the last part that you have is all the way down in verse 33, the last half. Notice it says, let the wife see to it that she respects her husband. I think respect is something. Notice it again, it's unconditional. It doesn't say, I'll respect him if he does these things. Respect the position, respect different things. So there's always some different things that none of us are perfect. And notice that it says for wives, and notice he makes a statement. It doesn't mean that if, which Jean and I have she had a friend too, and and it says obey him or submit in everything. That's within scriptural limits. You have Acts 5, what happens when you are to obey God rather than man. So I remember in this particular case, her husband wasn't a believer. She shouldn't have married him to begin with, but she did. And then he wanted a wife swap. You know, a lot of stuff goes on that we don't realize. So, you supposed to obey in everything, or do you say no? Obviously, scripturally, you say no. And different things take place. So I think it's important for us to recognize he's making a statement, but look at the rest of Scripture. Same thing happens in 1 Corinthians 3, talking about the wife submitting, talking about with Sarah. And if you remember when you get there, it says with gentleness and quietness. A gentle answer turns away wrath, so this how we respond, so with respect. So think about it, what he's telling us then for the wife is to submit and then also to have respect. What about the husband? In verse 25, some of you going, let's get on to the other half. He's really going to get socked. Notice in 25 it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. What did the church need? They needed a Savior to die on the cross for them, didn't it? So would you say then he is to love sacrificially? Notice, I think it's interesting, he does what is best for her, not what's best for him. If it was what's best for him, Christ never would have come to this earth. But to love sacrificially. Notice, I think it's interesting, I don't think we ever really get that far into it, but so often what happens, the word here is agape, to do what's best for the other person with no thought of return. Most of the time what we do is we love somebody, we do things for them, but we want something in return. And then what happens when we do that, the person can feel used. They're doing this because they want this, whatever it may be. We're doing what's best for the person, whether we get things in return or not, that's what we need to be doing. But love sacrificially. Notice the second thing that he says in verse 26 and 27, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present himself to the church in all of her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she should be holy and blameless. Talked about this earlier. He should love her spiritually. He needs to be the spiritual leader in the home. And I think one of the greatest needs we have today in American churches, we do not have spiritual leaders. I think you find it a lot better when you go overseas. You quite often will find the husband is much more of a spiritual leader. Now, he doesn't love his wife like he should in other areas, but the spiritual leader is quite often better. But notice he should love her sacrificially. He should be the spiritual leader, love her spiritually. She asks a question he doesn't know. He finds the answer. He wants to do it. Notice the third thing, in 28 and 29. So the husband ought to also love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. So no one ever hates his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it just as Christ does the church. He should love her sensitively. You know, if you guys like certain things to eat and you're hungry, what do? You go get something, you go get it, right? Okay, if we're loving her in the same way, then whatever she is wanting, so far as the sensitivity, she doesn't like these things, she likes these things. Just with ourselves, we do it. There's certain things I don't like, then I'm not going to eat it. Okay, if certain things she doesn't like, if I'm going to love her like I love myself, what? But what happens now that I'm getting all these doctor's reports and they're telling me all these changes need to take place? Well, if I love myself and want to be around a while, what do I have to do? I have to change. And so I think it's important. Notice what it tells you. We love ourselves. We take care of ourselves. I need to love her just like I love myself, so I need to take care of her. What's best for her? And so I think I notice then again, these are instructions to husbands. Wives don't need to be quoting this. Husbands don't need to be quoting the other. These are choices we make, no matter what the other's doing. Notice the next one that you have in verse 30, because we are members of his body. When we're loving our wife as we should, we're loving Christ. Because he instructed us to. If I don't love my wife as I should, I'm not loving Christ as I should. Notice what does he tell us? By this shall all men know you're my disciples, what? You keep my commandments. Notice then what you have in 31. I think it's interesting. For this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they two shall become one flesh. So leave and cleave. How many times do men leave the house, but they don't really leave the house? Mama comes with them, or daddy comes with them. And they need to be leaving and cleaving, forming their own. And so I think it's interesting what you have. One that's not here, and I want to talk about it and do a little bit more of it. It's interesting that you have on this. In 1 Peter chapter 3, let's look at it, and since we're talking about husbands, they also have wives here, but there was I wanted to get kind of some practical things and how we could do this. 1 Peter chapter 3, you have it when he's writing to wives, which you've already talked about, when he talks about being submissive and having inner beauty and not just outer beauty. And but notice when you get down, since we're talking about husbands right now, notice in verse 7. You husbands likewise live with your wife in an understanding way, as a weaker vessel, weaker meaning physically, not mentally or anything else. Since she is a woman, grant her honor as, notice, fellow heirs, so that your prayers may not be hindered. So notice then, how many of us are really living with your wife in an understanding way? You hear all these books are out. Remember the one is from Mars, the other's from Venus, right? Do men and women think a little different?
Yes.
Anybody think they think the same? Okay? All right, so if you live your wife in an understanding way, turn over to Deuteronomy then. Let's think about this for a minute. Deuteronomy 24. Notice in verse 5. When a man takes a new wife, he shall not go out to the army, nor be in charge of any duty. He shall be free at home 1 year, and shall give happiness to the wife with whom he stayed. How many of that ever time has that occurred? Did you spend so notice then, all women are different, and you spend a whole year, rather than any extra activities you're given, in trying to learn what makes your wife tick and what gives her happiness. How many times do you hear that happen? What happens is most of the time we're thinking of careers, we're thinking of all these different things, and we're moving. And notice that, again, this is instructions and this was, given to the whole nation, exempt from it. And it's interesting to look at. That's one thing I appreciate about Will, because he did that, and he would say no to different things. He said, Casey and I just got married, and I need to learn how to live with Casey like I should, and this is the verse that he was using. And I think it's important for all of us to be thinking about that. So notice then, you are to love her sacrificially. You should love her spiritually, love her sensitively, to love them like you're loving Christ. You leave and cleave and then learn and honor. I think the learning and honor is what I kind of want to give you some just practical things to be thinking about it. There's a book out, and I remember giving this since I've come across them. I've given this, which I don't do hardly any marital counseling, but I've had a few people I've married, and they wanted to know some things. So I gave them some books to read, and it's amazing what happens when they come back. I wish I had read these 45 years ago. One of them, I think it's interesting, and it's this one, For Better or For Best. And it's written basically for the women of how to understand their husbands. He had also written a book, If Only He Knew. It's interesting when I gave that to some different ones. I gave it to a couple there, and then I met with them each week for about 5 weeks, and we did different chapters. And they're going through it, And it's really cute to watch. They're sitting on the couch, and the girl, the young lady was sitting next to him. And, what about this? And then she'd be like, that's what I've been trying to tell you. That's what I've been trying to tell you. And it's like light bulbs are coming on. He wasn't living with her in an understanding way. He wasn't giving happiness. He didn't understand it. And so here they were writing this. I was talking to another young man, he said, and he read the book, he said, if I'd read that, I probably still wouldn't be dating this young lady. I had no idea what was going on, and I blew it. Well, if that's the case, if the books are out there, what do we need to do? We need to read them. Interesting, so we're saying in the sense, the other one that you have here, 5 love languages. Have any of you ever read it? Now you think about it, if that's the case, that means we speak different languages. Is that kind of the way we feel, guys? Girl? You're speaking English and he's speaking French. Well, there's a lot of, can you communicate? And I've been overseas different times. My English is bad, my foreign language is terrible, anyhow. But can you buy something? You can go by, you kind of point, and you do this, you kind of make little signs, and you figure out how much they want. So you communicate, but it really isn't well. But how many times is that what's going on in marriage? So it's interesting when Gary Chapman writes this book, this 5 love languages. And it's interesting now that I'm reading more about it. I wish I'd known it earlier, but I look at it. I was talking to Ruthie last night, and I was talking to Jesse as well. And I asked both of them to read the book before they got married. And I've talked with Mike also last night. I'm talking about what is your love language? Because what happens with the purpose of the book is you may each be loving each other, but it's not the way in which the spouse recognizes the love or wants it. So they may be loving you, but you don't see it. You may be loving them, and they don't see it, and therefore you come to the conclusion they don't love. The example in the book was this couple comes to him, and they are really upset, and they're ready to divorce. He doesn't love her. And he was saying, yes, I do. And so he started talking. He says, okay, we both work. We come home, I get home before she does. So I cook meals. 4 nights a week, I cook the meal. The 5th night, I take her out to eat. She has a bad back, so I do all the vacuuming and cleaning up. She has allergies, so I do all the yard work and keep it up outside. I think I love her. She says, no, he doesn't love her. And what would you be saying? The reason for is he's doing acts of service. But in her mind, after he does all this, when dinner's over, they don't talk during dinner, he goes and watches sports and they don't do anything. And she says, we don't communicate. I want quality time. So here he has, on the one, he's doing what he thinks acts of service. And she says, I don't want acts of service. I want quality time. So here they are, they both are trying to love each other, but they're not communicating because they're speaking different languages. And so sure enough, and I realized this with Jessie loves to have acts of service as her expression of love. But she wants acts of affirmation. When she's doing these things, she wants that affirmation. Well, it'd been nice if I'd come to that conclusion 30 years ago, but all you can do is pick up where you're at. Ruthie wants quality time. I was talking with Mike about it. He goes, oh yeah, she wants quality time. That's part of why she doesn't want to like him working so many hours. She likes to spend the time. So we think about it. Let's think about some of these, and then think about yourself. What is your love language, and what's your spouse's? We can say the submission. We can say love. Well, then, if you really love them, do you even know how to communicate to them what in the language that they understand? So think about it. I told you had 5. One is words of affirmation. Words of affirmation, again, we're doing it not to get something, but encouraging words. Some people they just love that affirmation. Am I doing a good job? How many times do people come home? Does the yard look nice? All these different things. What are they actually asking from you? They are looking for, that may be their love language. I'm doing all these things. I love you. Now I want you to affirm. Encouraging word. Kind word. If you give humble word, in other words, if you are saying this is what you ought to be doing, then it's basically a superior to an inferiorism. Then that is not what you need. So the words of affirmation, how many times are we looking at it and we affirming? Another one is quality time. Gene and I laugh about this a lot because we go out to eat and we sit there and we look, and it seems like at most tables, what are the couples doing? They're on their phone. Well, what kind of quality time is that? I mean, they're spending time. If they are, notice they're doing anything, they're on the phone, if they're TV, whatever, it's not quality time. They're spending time, but what kind of quality is it? So think about it, is it focused attention? You get together, how many times is there, this is a business call, I gotta catch it, this is this, I gotta do this. All these different things, well then we're missing. So some people, quality time really means a great deal. What about the quality conversations? You know, what you have, I think opposites attract, I think, so much of the time. Well, a lot of us, we have two different types of people. We have the Dead Sea person, everything just comes in, they just absorb it, but never say anything, right? And then you have the babbling brook, that everything just keeps coming out all the time, and they never say anything. Dad and I were working, and we worked on this block for over 10 years, 15 years. And we had one lady who came by every single week, and only 2 weeks out of over a year's time was she not talking. And she had different people she walked with, and I can imagine part of it is because they couldn't stand it anymore. But I'd ask Dad, or he'd tell me, hey, did you see JJ today? Or did you see Eminem? Motor mouth or jabberjaw? I mean, and we had 9 on the block in the whole time. Okay? Well, all you have. Okay, so if we are, either one that we are we stopping and listening to the other person? If they don't say much, then what kind of questions do you ask? Usually we ask a question with a yes/no answer. So then what do we get? A little grunt, right? We have to learn to speak if we're a Dead Sea. We have to learn to listen if we're a babbling brook. So think about where we're at. Okay, so think about the quality time, quality activities. One way you can help it then when you're listening is the quality. Okay, is this what you mean? And try to put it in your words. Because quite often we think we understand, but we really don't. If I can put into words what you're trying to say, it's going to really think, hey, he's really listening, or she's really listening. So besides words of affirmation, you have quality time. What about receiving gifts? Receiving gifts means a lot. We have a friend of ours, and I mean, that's the way he shows love. He says his gifts, always giving. Jesse's that way so far as she loves. Man, if she wants, she'll go way beyond. She's been that way her whole life. If she had $1, she'll spend $1.05. She just wants to help people all the time. Just always giving. And it's like, man, you got to say it. But that's her love language. She is saying, I love you based upon what she's given you and what she does for you. Now, she likes the words of affirmation to come back. So again, what about receiving gifts? I gave Jean some flowers this week. Okay, that's a gift, but what's she saying? When she sees the flowers, what is it saying? Is there unwritten words that are being spoken? How many of you ever get tired of getting a note? So there's different things in receiving gifts. What is it saying? I love you, and here's a gift, here's a note, whatever it might be. And quite often we say, well, it's I can't afford it. That's one of the best investments you can make. It's one of the best investments you can make to give the card or whatever. Because what it's going to cost you if you don't do these things, especially if that's their love language, what you need to do. Thinking about it too, it's a gift to yourself. Your physical presence means a lot. Undivided attention. And if it means you have to turn all the phones off or whatever, do whatever it takes. So you have that words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts. Another one is acts of service. A lot of people do acts of service. They're doing all kinds of things. I had a customer, and I'll never forget, she was married 50-something years. And she said, I know my husband loved me, but never once in 50-something years did he ever tell me he loved me. Never once. She never learned how to drive, but she worked full-time. They went to work together every day. She made him breakfast, she made him lunch, she made him dinner, everything. And she was a good cook. Once, just before he died, he said this was a good meal. Only time he ever complimented her on the meal. But what was her love language? Acts of service. I can imagine all those different, and I never met him. He'd already passed away. I did work for him for a number of years. But what is amazing to me, how many times I heard that same story about how he complimented her on that meal. If I heard it once, I heard it 2 or 3 dozen times. She cherished that one time. Why did he not say it more? She was wanting words of affirmation. She was given acts of service, and she was wanting that word. Why is it that we don't use our words like we should? Well, what is it? Is the love language of your spouse? Are you communicating to it? The last one they have on there is physical touch. We're not talking about the sexual. We're talking about just, we have people come to church in different ways. Some are huggers, right? That's just, and others are what? Get back. Okay? You have to realize who they are. That's just their love language, giving hugs, doing all the rest. I'll never forget, I was coaching basketball, and it happened on 2 different occasions. I had one that had internal injuries, wasn't supposed to play. We were playing Holland Hall. I had never beat them. They were our trial. And she played, and because of her defensive play, we won the game. Just barely, but the first time and the only time we ever beat them. And her mother came up to me afterward, and she was upset with me. She was upset because I was not demonstrative, or I didn't say enough about her daughter and how that we won because of her play. I thought I had said some things, but in her mind was affirmation. I wasn't really doing enough. Now that I look back on it, her love language is affirmation. I didn't do a very good job. I had another one, not even 2 weeks later, that got upset with me. The girl did well, and I wasn't demonstrative enough. Well, if you're a guy coach and you're coaching girls, how demonstrative can you be? And I had my arm on her shoulder, just patting her on the shoulder, that you did a good job, but I wasn't demonstrative enough. So what happens is you look at it, you begin to understand more what you can, just the hards that you're dealing with. You don't understand, but it's really difficult. But understanding what people are, where they're coming from, to know how to respond. So you think about it, these are the 5 love languages. Which one are you, and which one's your spouse? If I went around the room, how many of us think you can get it right? And is there ways and things we can learn? Remember, we're not doing things to get from them. We're doing things to express our love to them. Better the way they understand it. It's interesting in the book, he has a question. He said he challenges you to ask your spouse every week, how full is your love tank on a 1 to 10? If they say a 7 or whatever, then the question is, how can I make it full? Well, if it's action of service and you're tired, you may say, would you vacuum the house for me? If you love your wife, what would you do? You vacuum the house. So it's interesting, where are we at? Am I really willing to do these things? I think what happens on that. So think about these questions then, just when you're looking back through these 5 different ones. But let me think about some ones we looked at. Wives, do you respect and submit to your own husbands as unto Christ? He's not making you inferior or anything like that. That's within the home. Husbands, do you love your wife as Christ loved the church? Pretty big, you think about it. I'm thinking that's one of the, I don't care how good we get, we're never going to get where we need to be, but we can work on it. And then, what is your love language? What is your spouse's, and how can I love them better this week? Little thing. I'm sure if you asked your wife, or you asked your husband, I'm sure they'd tell you if you listen. And maybe silently, or indirectly. It was interesting, I was reading the one, his wife had been asking her husband for 9 months to paint the bedroom. 9 months. And she kept nagging him every week. And she then said, this is a sunny day, perfect day, and he's over there and he's wanting to go and he's rattle off what he wanted to do. And she comes to him and says, I've had enough. So after going through things, he realized the husband likes affirmation. He said, okay, what I want you to do, for the next 3 months, you do not say one word about that bedroom. Not one word. But every time he does things for you, I want you to affirm to him how much that meant to you. She saw him 3 months later, the bedroom was painted. Because he enjoyed all the compliments that she was giving him for the things that he was doing. He knew she wanted it, so he wanted the compliment. So what did he do? He painted. So think about what's the love language, and then not doing something to get something, but doing something because that's what is best for them. Is best for them. Is best for them. Is best for them.